to those service procedures which the JB650 JetMate watercraft does not share with the jet ski line of personal watercraft. We will cover the engine, carburetor service, fuel system service, electrical system service, control stick system, jet pump reverser, hull construction, and storage tips. Information not covered here is available in the JetMate service manual and in the training videotapes for the jet ski watercraft. In order to work safely on the JetMate without damaging the hull, prepare a stand like this one so that the supports fit into the tunnels in the hull. Be sure the stand does not touch the last 16 inches of the stern. Make sure the stand is strong enough to support the 660-pound JetMate. Now let's pull the engine. First, remove the engine hood. Take out the 4 screws. Pull apart the wiring connectors, disconnect the ball joint and the shift cable. Then remove the rear seat. Now take the battery cables off both battery terminals, first the negative and then the positive. Disconnect these cables and hoses from the engine. Throttle cable, choke cable, fuel line, pulse hose, oil hose, spark plug leads, exhaust pipe, bypass outlet hose, water inlet hose, ground cable, and finally the starter cable. Remove the electric case cover and disconnect the 5 magneto leads. Take out the 2 bolts and pull the magneto leads out of the case. Unscrew the 4 engine bed mounting bolts. Move the engine forward slightly in the hole. If there are shims, mark them so they can be put back in the same place. Spread a protective cloth on the deck and lift the engine out. The JB650 needs more electrical power than the 650 jet skis, so its flywheel is larger. Remove the oil pump, and then remove the magneto cover. Use only these tools in the JetMate flywheel. Hold the flywheel with the holder and take out the bolt. You may need to extend the handle on the holder to turn this bolt. Screw the adapter bolt into the end of the crankshaft. Attach the magneto puller to the flywheel. Be sure to use the correct length bolts with the flywheel holder and puller. Longer bolts could hit the stator coils and damage them. Screw the rotor puller into the flywheel puller. Tap the puller with a hammer if the flywheel is particularly stubborn. During engine installation, place the engine in line with the drive shaft to properly position the engine in the hull. Apply a non-permanent locking agent to the engine bed mounting bolts and screw them partway in. Put back any shims removed earlier. Rock the engine gently to determine if the shims are the right thickness. Tighten the engine bed mounting bolts to the specified torque. Be sure the inside mark on this washer faces the engine. Now let's move on to carburetor service. The mixture screws are individually set during manufacture to an optimum flow rate for sea level use. Then these limiter caps are installed with the pointer straight down, but minor adjustment is allowed. If the boat is used at higher altitudes, the mixture from the carburetor will be richer because of the lower atmospheric pressure. At high altitudes, turn the high-speed mixture screw in as specified. Do not adjust the low-speed screw. Remove the cap and turn in the screw. Put the cap back on with the pointer straight down. Be sure to record any high altitude adjustment. After setting the idle speed, the throttle cable should be adjusted so that this lever touches the carburetor stop when the throttle lever is wide open. When the throttle lever is released, the throttle cable must have a little play. Loosen the lock nuts, and then turn the adjuster to allow 1 to 2 millimeters of cable slack with the throttle released. This will ensure that the throttle closes all the way to idle. Be sure to tighten the lock nuts securely and recheck the cable adjustment. Choke cable adjustment is the same as for the jet ski watercraft. The flame arrestor on the top of the carburetor must be correctly installed. The flat side faces down. If the arrestor element is installed the wrong way, it may touch the arrestor case and be damaged and may cause engine damage as well. Now, let's examine the rest of the fuel system. The fuel tank is under the rear seat. The fuel pump supplies fuel to the carburetor. And the return line carries extra fuel back to the tank. The outside fuel tap can turn the fuel flow on or off. The main fuel tap can turn the fuel flow on or off and has a reserve position too. The main fuel tap also has an anti-siphon valve built into it. If the fuel line is broken, fuel cannot siphon out of the tank and spill into the boat. Spilled fuel is a fire hazard. The anti-siphon valve is a kind of non-return valve. The spring-loaded plunger closes the fuel passage. When the engine is running, the fuel pump overpowers the spring and pulls fuel past the plunger. When the engine stops, the spring-loaded plunger immediately stops the fuel flow. To check the anti-siphon valve, disconnect the fuel outlet hose from the main fuel tap. Connect a hand pump to the outlet fitting. Run a hose from the pump to a container on the ground next to the boat. Turn the fuel tap on. Pump fuel from the tank into the container. Stop the pump. If fuel continues to siphon from the tank, the anti-siphon valve is dirty inside or damaged. Turn the fuel tap off and remove the pump. Disassemble the anti-siphon valve. Lift out the spring and plunger. If the parts are only dirty, clean them in a high flash point solvent. Also, clean the filter on the fuel pickup. If the internal parts of the anti-siphon valve are damaged, replace the fuel tap assembly with a new one. Reassemble the valve and tighten the nut to the specified torque. The fuel tank is vented to the outside of the hull. The center of the air vent pipe is curved as shown, so water can't get into the fuel tank. Let's take a look at the unique features of the JetMate electrical system. Inside the electric case, the CDI igniter, the starter relay, and the voltage regulator are protected from getting wet. Note that these components are grounded to the CDI igniter unit mounting bolt. The cable fastened to the starter relay along with the red lead goes to the positive terminal of the battery. The other cable goes to the starter. It's marked with gray for identification. If the plug leads need to be pulled through the rubber seals, lubricate them with a silicone grease. Caution, any other kind of grease could damage the plug leads. One of the features in the JetMate not found in the jet ski is this temperature sensor. If the engine overheats, the sensor sounds an alarm in the steering case. The alarm is triggered when the cooling water at the sensor exceeds 95 degrees Celsius. The sensor closes the circuit, sounding the alarm. Test the sensor by heating it in a container of water. It should turn on when the water reaches 95 degrees Celsius, and off when the water cools to 88 degrees Celsius. Test the alarm with a 12-volt battery. Possible causes of overheating are a clogged pump inlet grate, a loose hose on the pump or engine fittings, or a cooling passage in the engine may be restricted by deposits. The engine compartment of any inboard powerboat should be completely clear of gasoline vapors before starting the engine. The JetMate has an electric fan ventilation system to do this. Fresh air comes in through this vent, goes through a duct molded into the hull, blows through the engine compartment, into another duct in the hull, past the fan, and out this vent. Check the fan by connecting it directly to a 12-volt battery. If it doesn't work, replace it with a new one. If the fan is okay, check the fuse assembly, the connector near the fan, and the switch in its connectors. The JetMate has an electric bilge pump mounted in the bottom of the engine compartment. The operator switches it on to drain water from the engine compartment. Check the bilge pump in the same way as the ventilation fan. If the pump does not work, replace it with a new one. If the pump is okay, check the fuse assembly, the connector near the battery, and the switch in its connectors. The JetMate engine will not start while in forward or reverse. The shift lever has a starter lockout switch, so the engine starts only in the start position. The starter lockout switch conducts only in the start position. To check the switch, use an ohmmeter. When the button is out, the ohmmeter should read 0 ohms. Push the button in and the meter should read infinity. Static electricity ground leads connect the fuel taps and filler to the ventilation fan mounting plate to prevent fire. Be sure to reconnect them securely to this terminal if they are removed. The control stick system is a new and unique feature of the JetMate. The control stick is mounted just in front of the operator. Moving the stick from side to side moves this linkage. The linkage passes the motion to a cable, which moves the steering nozzle. The JetMate nozzle has a special balance tab to reduce the force needed to move the control stick. Without the tab, the force of the water on the nozzle tries to push it back to the straight ahead position against the input from the operator. This would make the control stick hard to move. The tab is mounted forward of the nozzle pivot point. The force of the water flow against it partially balances the force on the nozzle. The result is lighter steering. To disassemble the control stick, first take out the screw and pull off the choke knob. Lift the plate and remove the choke pulley mounting screws. Now remove the steering case screws. Take out the control stick pivot bolt and then lift off the steering case. Take off the upper and lower control stick covers to get to the start and stop button wiring and the throttle cable. Free the grommet at the base of the stick. Then take off this clamp to get the throttle cable out. Free the end of the cable from the throttle lever. Remove these 4 bolts to take out the control stick. To remove the start and stop button wiring, first cut this cable tie. Then remove these 3 bolts and pull apart the connectors before pulling the wires out of the case. Before reassembling the control stick, put a little grease on the end of the throttle cable. Push the throttle cable housing against the stop and clamp it into the stick. During assembly of the control stick, this wiring guard must be outside the stick itself. Temporarily slip the pivot bolt through to align the holes perfectly. To check steering cable adjustment, first center the control stick and see if the nozzle is also centered. If the nozzle is not centered, adjustment is needed. Measure the length between the lock nuts and the control stick rod. The specified length is 118 to 120 millimeters. Adjust the length if necessary. Lightly wedge the nozzle in the center of the pump cavity. Loosen the lock nut and take the ball joint off the ball. Center the control stick and then turn the ball joint until the hole aligns with the ball. Reattach the ball joint and tighten the lock nut. These bushings in the steering brackets carry the steering shafts. The main bracket has a two-piece bushing and the other has cylindrical bushings. If there's any noticeable play in these shafts, check the bushings. If you can feel anywhere, replace the bushings. Oil the throttle inner cable with a penetrating lubricant. As listed in the periodic maintenance chart, grease the throttle cable ends every 25 hours. The JetMate has a thrust reversing system so it can back up. This reverser bucket directs the water flow forward under the boat to drive it backward. Reverse, start, and forward are controlled by the shift lever. In forward, the bucket is held above the pump nozzle. Moving the shift lever to start moves the bucket about halfway down, covering the mouth of the nozzle. Because the bucket is a close fit at the top of the nozzle and open at the bottom, the jet stream from the pump goes straight down. The result is no thrust either forward or reverse. The boat stands still. When the shift lever is moved to reverse, the bucket drops all the way down. The water flow from the pump is turned forward under the boat, driving it backward. Even though the bucket does not turn with the steering nozzle, the spherical shape of the bucket exactly reverses the jet stream. Thus, the boat turns in the same direction as the control stick. The reverser bucket is pivoted on the jet pump cover. To remove the bucket, first disconnect the reverse cable ball joint. Take out the 4 pump cover mounting bolts. The cover and bucket come out together. Now, take out the Allen head pivot bolts to separate the bucket from the cover. During installation, use a non-permanent locking agent on the pivot bolts and tighten them to the specified torque. Use the same locking agent on the pump cover bolts. The torque spec is important here too. Rubber dampers are mounted on the reverser bucket as stops. In forward, the upper damper rests against the pump outlet. When the lever is moved to reverse, the lower dampers stop against the edge of the pump cover. If the dampers don't touch as described, adjust the shift cable. Shift into reverse and push the nozzle to the left. Loosen the lock nut and remove the ball joint from the ball. Push the bucket all the way down. Turn the ball joint until the hole aligns with the ball. Attach the ball joint and tighten the lock nut securely. JetMate hole construction is quite different from the jet ski watercraft holes. The hole is made in 2 pieces, the deck and the bottom of the hole. The space between the 2 pieces is filled with expanded urethane foam for structural rigidity and flotation. The deck and hull are made of fiber reinforced plastic laid up by hand. The surface color is gel coat, not paint. Gel coat is a thin layer of plastic resin on the outside surface of the hull. The color goes all the way through to the fiberglass underneath. The gel coat is smooth and tough, but it can be damaged if it is treated too roughly. Do not use abrasive cleaners on the JetMate hull or it will lose its glossy shine. Hull repair is covered in another videotape because of the complexities of gel coat repair. Proper storage is important to keep the JetMate in good condition. Start by flushing the cooling system. Connect a garden hose to the flushing connector, but do not turn on the water yet. Start the engine and let it idle. Now turn the water on just a little. Water will come out of the exhaust outlet near the jet pump nozzle and out the bypass outlet. Turn the water off and rev the engine a few times until water stops coming out. Then stop the engine. Disconnect the water hose and cap the flushing connector. To flush the bilge system, pull the outlet hose off the pump. Connect the garden hose to the outlet hose with a suitable adapter and run water through the hose. Disconnect the bilge hose and the cooling water inlet hose. Take out the bracket bolts and remove the bilge pump. Remove the screws and take out the bottom cover out of the pump. Clean the impeller and bottom cover. Reinstall the bilge pump and mop up any water that may be in the engine compartment. Drain the fuel tank. Leave the tank cap loose to prevent condensation in the tank. Start the engine and let it run for short periods to use up the fuel in the carburetor and fuel pump. Stop the engine immediately if the temperature warning alarm goes on to prevent overheating damage. Take out the flame arrestor element. Clean it with compressed air if necessary. Spray a little rust-inhibiting lubricant down the carburetor bore and then reinstall the flame arrestor. Remove the spark plugs and ground the leads. Pour 15 milliliters of oil into each plug hole and then crank the engine with a starter to coat the cylinder walls with oil. Remove the battery for separate storage. Clean the boat with soapy water. Raise and support the bow of the boat. This drain screw drains the deck when the deck drain screw is also opened. After all the water has drained out, put the screws back in. Lubricate the boat following the instructions in the service manual, from stem to stern. Open the engine compartment hatch to prevent any condensation inside the engine compartment. Cover the boat with a cloth or plastic and then store it in a clean, dry place. For more details on the procedures covered in this presentation, see the JetMate Service Manual.